Hi, it's your old friend Geri Atrik, and I'm going to tell you about the village of New Preston, Connecticut, what it was like years ago. Um, just to note that you cannot buy a loaf of bread nor a quart of milk there today. But anyway, as you came down the hill from the lake, on the right is Pavilion Hall, and which is a meeting place for the Lake Warmog and New Preston people. And it was like a basketball court too. And anyway, the post office was on the bottom floor there, on the right, or on the left. I'm sorry. And Mr. Grannis was the postmaster, and he was a crotchety crab. But anyway, you were always afraid to ask him anything. And then across the outlet of the lake there, was the East Aspetuck or whatever it is, was Swanson's, which was they were the ice people. They delivered ice every day around the lake. Maybe not every day, but 2 or 3 times a week. And Ralph Swanson, who was a red-faced, um, blue-eyed Swede, um, and a jolly-looking guy. He drove the truck, and his assistant was Walter Ferris, who I think had a uh, little drinking problem, but he was able to operate. But anyway, um, he was the guy that carried the ice into the house. And then back to the other side of the river um, was Cressel's variety store. And Larry Cressel um sold everything that you couldn't buy someplace else. But he had, it was like the convenience store of those days. He also had a big firework display at Fourth of July, where it was in his display window, and you'd go in there and want to buy, candle. Um, I forgot the name of them, but they would shoot balls up in the air. And he always had a cigar in his mouth, so you'd say, "Well, I want one of those, or the skyrockets over there, or the Roman candles, or whatever." And he'd lean in there, and they'd be dripping the ashes down. And you always thought the store was going to explode, but anyway, it didn't. And above the store is where the Cressels lived, and there were uh, three boys. Sparky, who I went to school with, Alvin, who eventually took it over, and one that worked for the Washington Corky, worked for the Washington Supply, and then there was a daughter. But that building is the same size today, I think. All those four people were upstairs. Then going down towards the village, going south, um, was Armstrong's meat market. And if you go by there today, there's a space between where Cressel's was and um, where the meat market was, and it's a candy store right now. But the space that is open towards the river was where they kept the meat. In other words, it was a locker and refrigerated. And Mr. Armstrong and his assistant was his last name was Calhoun. Um, anyway, he was the assistant butcher, and you'd go in there for a steak, and they'd go into the locker, and they'd come out with a side of beef, and they'd cut off what you wanted. And they also had produce in there, from the farms, fresh string beans and corn, etc., etc. And then next to that, where all these antique things are, was the hardware store, which was owned by Washington Supply, and George or Nick Platt was the guy that ran it. And he was a wonderful guy, but he didn't have much ambition. And you'd go in there sometimes, and the back of the store was right over the river. And you'd go back there, and he'd be fishing instead of waiting on the customers. And then where that kitchen store is, that was somebody living in there. There was no store there. I mean, it later became a drugstore with honey. And then there was Couch's Garage. They were the Dodge Plymouth dealer, and a lot of the summer people used to buy their car there because Cliff Couch was such a charming guy that they wanted to buy a car from him. And his brother Myron was more the mechanic end of the team. And we stored our motors there for the winter, and they're the ones that installed the big Elto on our speedboat. I mean, it was a two-man job to lift the thing and bring it up. But anyway, then Myron Couch lived in where the garden place is today. So he was right near his work. And they eventually moved down to New Milford because the Chrysler people, didn't want them to be in such a small place. So they moved down there. And then the house became a liquor store. And that was owned by Stanley, the barber's brother. I can't think of his name. And then you crossed the street and you went down to Lyman's, the general store, where they had everything but meat. And Mr. and Mrs. Lyman, Ned Lyman, and I've forgotten her name, but they were very personable, nice people. And that's where you'd go with your list, and they would bring it to the counter and then, add it up, etc. And then next door was Mr. Lyman's sister, Burgess, her name was, Mrs. Burgess. And that was, their residence. And that's where 10 Main is now, the luncheon place and breakfast place. And then across the street was the blacksmith shop, Bill Jessen. I've forgotten where he came from, either Czechoslovakia or Poland. But he was a bull of a man. I mean, he wasn't tall, but he was built like I can't say it, but a brick something. And he was a jack of all trades. I mean, people would come in there with broken wheels and a broken axle or something, and he knew metals enough where he could fire it and pound it and make it a usable thing again. And my grandfather used to get out there and make andirons, and also we had a tracing of a big bass that had been caught on the lake, and my grandfather brought the tracing down. It was done on a board, and he brought it down to Bill, and Bill made a weather vane out of it, which was on top of our flagpole at the lake. And I don't know, once my other grandfather came up to visit, and my mother brought him down there. And I think he spent the day down there because, he was brought up in those days when the blacksmith was an important member of the community. And they just, gabbed and gabbed and gabbed. Bill also played the accordion. And I don't know whether he knew more than one song, but they sounded the same. And whatever he played, you'd say, play. But it all sounded like it's a long, long way to Tipperary. But anyway, my grandfather every year would have fellow doctors from Stanford up for a lobster bake, and he'd always get Bill to play the accordion, and after a few libations, everybody, people would be dancing, and Bill would be having he was just a jolly, nice man. And then my grandfather would have had another group up there, which was the police chief and the fire chief and the hoi polloi of politics in Stanford. And, Bill would be there for that too. So, and that's about what was there in New Preston. There were, there was a cider mill that you could see from the back of Couch's garage. And then down the hill there was another mill that in the wintertime it looked like Dr. Zhivago. I mean, it was like an ice cube with windows. And somebody, I've forgotten the guy that lived there, but they eventually had to tear it down. So that tells you a bit about New Preston. There aren't many of us that remember it, so pass it on. Bye-bye.